Hello and welcome to the third reading from the autobiography of John Newton, Out of the Depths. Today we will read letters 5 and 6. Why he's put them in a series of letters, I do not know, but it seems he's writing to the Reverend T. Hawes, or Hawes, Haweis, published in 1764. This is, I don't even think it's got a sort, what do they call that? A numbered thing on the back which you can register it with. It's just got 00582 0125 MP. Someone has asked me to read what's on the back. So, John Newton, an autobiography. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. John Newton had an unusual appreciation for the grace of God, for he had wandered a tremendous distance from it. John Newton is his own account of his journey into God's grace. In a series of 14 letters written to a friend, John Newton discloses the many acts of providence that eventually led to his salvation. From his early years of hardship and his life as a sailor and slave dealer, he relates God's love and mercy in delivering him and using him as an effective weapon against the devil he once served. So, letter 5, which is Charles in West Africa. There seems an important instruction in these words of our dear Lord. Mine hour is not yet come. The 2 following years, of which I am now to give some account, will seem as an absolute blank in a very short life. But as the Lord's hour of grace was not yet come, I was to have still deeper experience of the dreadful state of the heart of man when left to itself. I have seen frequent cause since to admire the mercy of the Lord in banishing me to those distant parts, and almost excluding me from human society at a time when I was big with mischief, and, like one infected with a pestilence, was capable of spreading a taint wherever I went. Had my affairs taken a different turn, had I succeeded in my designs and remained in England, my sad story would probably have been worse in myself indeed. I could hardly have been, but my wickedness would have had greater scope. I might have been very hurtful to others and multiplied irreparable evils, but the Lord wisely placed me where I could do others little harm. The few I had to converse with were too much like myself, and I was soon brought into such abject circumstances that I was too low to have any influence. I was rather shunned and despised than imitated, there being few even of the, it says Negroes, I'm going to use a different word, the African people, even of the African people themselves, during the first year of my residence among them, but thought themselves too good to speak to me. The use of the word Negroes this was produced in the 18th century, so it has the language of the day and hasn't been changed to meet a more modern society. So I apologise. I do apologise for that. I will try and use a different word. I was as yet an outcast lying in my blood, Ezekiel 16 verse 6, and to all appearance exposed to perish. But the Lord beheld me with mercy. He did not strike me to hell as I justly deserved. He passed by me when I was in my blood, and said unto me, Live. The appointed time for the manifestation of his love to cover all my iniquities with the robe of his righteousness, and to admit me to the privileges of his children, was not till long afterward. Yet he bade me live. I can only ascribe it to his secret upholding power, that what I suffered in a part of this interval did not bereave me either of my life or senses. Yet, since by these sufferings the force of my evil example and inclination was lessened, I have reason to account them amongst my mercies. It may not be amiss to give you a very brief sketch of the geography of the circuit I was now confined to. I may have frequent occasion to refer to places that I shall now mention, for my trade afterward, when the Lord gave me to see better days, was chiefly to the same places, and with the same persons, where and by whom I had been considered on a level with their meanest slaves. From Cape de Verde, the most western point of Africa, to Cape Mount, the whole coast is full of rivers, and when it says the most western, the following geographical description is inserted as Newton wrote it, but the reader will bear in mind the changes that have occurred during a long interval of time. 1764 is 261 years to today. This was written in the, I assume, the 70s, so it would have been about 210 years. From Cape de Verde, the most western point of Africa, to Cape Mount, the whole coast is full of rivers. The principal are Gambia, Rio Grande, Sierra Leone, and Sherbro. Of the former, as it is well known, and as I was never there, I need say nothing. The Rio Grande, like the Nile, divides into many branches near the sea. On the most northerly, called Cachao, the Portuguese have a settlement. At the time they did. The most southern branch, known by the name of Rio Nuna, is, or then was, the usual boundary of the whiteman's trade northward. Sierra Leone is a mountainous peninsula, uninhabited and inaccessible on account of the thick woods, except in those parts which lie near the water. The river is large and navigable. About 12 leagues to the southeast are 3 contiguous islands called the Benanos, about 20 miles in circuit. This was about the centre of the whiteman's residence. 7 leagues farther the same way lie the Plantains, 3 small islands 2 miles distant from the continent, at the point which forms one side of the Sherbro. This river is more properly a sound running within a long island, and receiving the confluences of several large rivers unknown to song, but far more deeply engraven in my remembrance than the Po or Tiber. The southernmost of these has a very peculiar course, almost parallel to the coast. It will seldom lead one above 3 miles, and sometimes not more than half a mile from the seashore. Indeed, I know not but that all these rivers may have communications with each other and with the sea in many places. If you cast your eyes upon a large map of Africa, you will have a general idea of the country I was in. Most of the places I have mentioned are in the same order as I have named them. My new master had formerly resided near Cape Mount, but now he settled at the Plantains, upon the largest of the 3 islands. It is a low sandy island, almost 2 miles in circumference and almost covered with palm trees. We immediately began to build a house and to enter upon trade. I had now some desire to retrieve my lost time and to exert diligence in what was before me. He was a man with whom I might have lived tolerably well, if he had not been soon influenced against me. He was much under the direction of a black woman, who lived with him as a wife. She was a person of some consequence in her own country, and he owed his first rise to her interest. The woman, I know not for what reason, was strangely prejudiced against me from the first. What made it still worse for me was a severe illness, which attacked me very soon, before I had opportunity to show what I could or would do in his service. Treated with scorn and contempt. I was sick when he sailed in a shallop to Rio Nuna, and he left me in the woman's hands. At first I was taken some care of, but as I did not recover very soon, she grew weary and entirely neglected me. I had sometimes not a little difficulty to procure a draught of cold water when burning with a fever. My bed was a mat spread upon a board or chest, and a log of wood my pillow. When my fever left me and my appetite returned, I would gladly have eaten, but no one gave me. She lived in plenty herself, but hardly allowed me sufficient to sustain life. Now and then, when in the highest good humour, she would send me victuals in her own plate after she had dined. So greatly was my pride humbled, I received this with thanks and eagerness, as the most needy beggar does an alms. Once, I well remember, I was called to receive this bounty from her own hand, and being exceedingly weak and feeble, I dropped the plate. Those who live in plenty can hardly conceive how this loss touched me, but she had the cruelty to laugh at my disappointment. Though the table was covered with dishes, she lived much in the European manner, she refused to give me any more. My distress has been at times so great as to compel me to go by night and pull up roots in the plantation at the risk of being punished as a thief. These I have eaten raw upon the spot for fear of discovery. The roots I speak of are very wholesome food, when boiled or roasted, but as unfit to be eaten raw in any quantity as a potato. I have sometimes been relieved by strangers, even by slaves in the chain, who have secretly brought me victuals, for they dared not be seen from their own slender pittance. Next to pressing want, nothing sits harder upon the mind than scorn and contempt. Of this I had an abundant measure. When I was very slowly recovering, this woman would sometimes pay me a visit not to pity or relieve, but to insult me. She would call me worthless and indolent, and compel me to walk, which I could hardly do. She would then send her attendants to mimic my motion, to clap their hands, laugh and throw limes at me. If they chose to throw stones, as was the case once or twice, they were not rebuked. Though all who depended on her favour must join in her treatment, yet when she was out of sight, I was rather pitied than scorned by the meanest of her slaves. Accused with dishonesty. At length my master returned from his voyage. I complained of ill usage, but he could not believe me, and as I did it in her hearing, I fared no better for it. But in his second voyage he took me with him. We did pretty well for a while, till a brother trader he met in the river persuaded him that I was unfaithful, that I stole his goods in the night or when he was on shore. This was almost the only vice I could not be justly charged with. The only remains of a good education I could boast of was what is commonly called honesty. As far as he had entrusted me, I had been always faithful. Though my great distress might in some measure have excused it, I never once thought of defrauding him in the smallest matter. However, the charge was believed, and I was condemned without evidence. Hunger and exposure. From that time he likewise used me very hardly. Whenever he left the vessel I was locked upon deck, with a pint of rice for my day's allowance, and if he stayed longer I had no relief till his return. Indeed, I believe I should have been nearly starved but for an opportunity of catching fish sometimes. When fowls were killed for his own use, I seldom was allowed any part but the entrails to bait my hooks with. At what we call slack water, that is, about the changing of the tides when the current was still, I used generally to fish, for at other times it was not practicable, and I very often succeeded. If I saw a fish upon my hook, my joy was little less than any other person may have found in the accomplishment of the scheme he had most at heart. Such a fish, hastily broiled, or rather half burned, without sauce, salt, or bread, has afforded me a delicious meal. If I caught none, I might, if I could, sleep away my hunger till the return of slack water, and then try again. Nor did I suffer less from the inclemency of the weather and the want of clothes. The rainy season was now advancing. My clothing was a shirt, a pair of trousers, a cotton handkerchief instead of a cap, and a cotton cloth about 2 yards long for upper garments. Thus accoutred, I have been exposed for 20, 30, perhaps nearly 40 hours together in incessant rains, accompanied with strong gales of wind, without the least shelter when my master was on shore. I feel some faint returns of the violent pains I then contracted. The excessive cold and wet I endured in that voyage, and so soon after I had recovered from a long sickness, quite broke my constitution and my spirits. The latter were soon restored, but the effects of the former still remain with me as a needful memento of the service and wages of sin. In about 2 months we returned. The rest of the time I remained with him was chiefly spent at the plantains, under the same regime as I have already mentioned. My haughty heart was now brought down, not to a wholesome repentance, nor to the language of the prodigal. This was far from me, but my spirits were sunk, and I lost all resolution and almost all reflection. I had lost the fierceness which fired me on board the Harwich, and which made me capable of the most desperate attempts. But I was no further changed than a tiger tamed by hunger. Remove the occasion, and he will be as wild as ever. One thing, though strange, is true. Though destitute of food and clothing, depressed to a degree beyond common wretchedness, I could sometimes collect my mind to mathematical studies. I had bought Barrow's Euclid at Plymouth. It was the only volume I brought on shore. It was always with me, and I used to take it to remote corners of the island by the seaside and draw my diagrams with a long stick upon the sand. Thus I often beguiled my sorrows and almost forgot my feeling. Without any other assistance, I made myself, in a good measure, master of the first 6 books of Euclid. Euclid. So letter 6 enters the service of a new master. There is much piety and spirit in the grateful acknowledgment of Jacob. With my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I am become 2 bands. These are words which ought to affect me with a peculiar emotion. I remember that some of those mournful days to which my last letter refers, I was busied in planting some lime or lemon trees. The plants I put in the ground were no longer than a young gooseberry bush. My master and his mistress, passing by the place, stopped a while to look at me. "Who knows," said he, "who knows but by the time these trees grow up and bear you may go home to England, obtain the command of a ship, and return to reap the fruits of your labours. We see strange things sometimes happen." This, as he intended it, was a cutting sarcasm. I believe he thought it as probable that I should live to be King of Poland, yet it proved a prediction, and one of them at least lived to see me return from England in the capacity he had mentioned, and pluck some of the first limes from those very trees. How can I proceed till I raise a monument to the divine goodness by comparing the circumstances in which the Lord has since placed me with what I was at that time? Had you seen me go, pensive and solitary, in the dead of night to wash my one shirt upon the rocks, and afterward put it on wet, that it might dry upon my back while I slept? Had you seen me so poor a figure that when a ship's boat came to the island, shame often constrained me to hide myself in the woods from the sight of strangers? Especially had you known that my conduct, principles, and heart were still darker than my outward condition, how little would you have imagined that one who so fully answered to the description of the apostle, hateful and hating one another, was reserved to be so peculiar an instance of the providential care and exuberant goodness of God. There was at that time but one earnest desire in my heart, which was not contrary, and shocking both to religion and reason. That one desire, though my vile licentious life rendered me peculiarly unworthy of success, and though 1,000 difficulties seemed to render it impossible, the Lord was pleased to gratify. But this favour, though great and greatly prized, was a small thing compared to the blessings of his grace. He spared me to give me the knowledge of himself in the person of Jesus Christ, in love to my soul. He delivered me from the pit of corruption and cast all my aggravated sins behind his back. He brought my feet into the paths of peace. When he made me acceptable to himself and the beloved, he gave me favour in the sight of others. He raised me new friends, protected and guided me through a long series of dangers, and crowned every day with repeated mercies. To him I owe it that I am still alive, and that I am not still living in hunger, in thirst, in nakedness, and the want of all things. Into that state I brought myself, but it was he who delivered me. He has given me an easy situation in life, some experimental knowledge of his gospel, a large acquaintance among his people, a friendship and correspondence with several of his most honoured servants. It is as difficult to enumerate my present advantages as it is fully to describe the evils and miseries of the preceding contrast. I know not exactly how long things continued thus with me, but I believe nearly a year. In this interval I wrote 2 or 3 times to my father. I gave him an account of my condition and desired his assistance, intimating at the same time that I had resolved not to return to England unless he was pleased to send for me. I have likewise letters written to the one I loved in that dismal period. At the lowest ebb, it seems, I still retained a hope of seeing her again. My father replied to his friend in Liverpool, of whom I have spoken before. He gave orders accordingly to a captain of his own, who was then fitting out for Gambia and Sierra Leone. Better circumstances. Within the year, as I have said, I obtained my master's consent to live with another trader on the same island. Without his consent, I could not be taken. He was unwilling to do it sooner, but it was then brought about. This was much to my advantage. I was soon decently clothed, lived in plenty, was considered as a companion, and trusted with the care of all his domestic effects to the amount in money of some £1,000. This man had several factories and white servants in different places, particularly one in Kitam, the river which runs so nearly along the sea-coast. I was soon appointed to go there, where I had a share in the management of business, jointly with another of his servants. We lived as we pleased, business flourished, and our employer was satisfied. I began to be wretch enough to think myself happy. There is a significant phrase frequently used in those parts that such a white man has grown black. It does not intend an alteration of complexion, but disposition. I have known several who, settling in Africa after the age of 30 or 40, have at that time of life been gradually assimilated to the tempers, customs, and ceremonies of the natives, so far as to prefer that country to their own. They have even become dupes to all the pretended charms, necromancies, amulets, and divinations of the blinded natives, and put more trust in such things than the wiser sort among the natives. A part of this spirit of infatuation was growing upon me. In time, perhaps I might have yielded to the whole. I entered into closer engagements with the inhabitants, and should have lived and died a wretch among them, if the Lord had not watched over me for good. Not that I had lost those ideas which chiefly engaged my heart to England, but despair of seeing them accomplished made me willing to remain where I was. I thought I could more easily bear the disappointment in this situation than nearer home, but as soon as I had fixed my connections and plans with these views, the Lord providentially interposed to break them in pieces and to save me from ruin in spite of myself. In the meantime, the ship that had orders to bring me home arrived at Sierra Leone. The captain made inquiry for me there and at the Benanos, but understanding that I was at a great distance in the country, he thought no more about me. Without doubt the hand of God directed my being placed at Kitam just at this time. As the ship came no nearer than the Benanos and stayed but a few days, if I had been at the Plantains, I should not perhaps have heard of her till she had sailed. The same must have certainly been the event, had I been sent to any other factory of which my new master had several. But though this place was more than 100 miles distant from the Plantains, yet I was still within a mile of the sea-coast. More remarkable, I was at that very juncture going in quest of trade to a place some distance from the sea. I should have set out a day or 2 before, but we had waited for a few articles from the next ship to complete the assortment of goods I was to take with me. We used sometimes to walk on the beach in expectation of seeing a vessel pass by, but this was very precarious, as at this time the place was not resorted to by ships for trade. I do not know that they had stopped while I was there, though some had before, upon observing a signal made from the shore. Freed from a captivity of 15 months. In February 1747, I know not the exact date, my fellow servant, walking down to the beach in the afternoon, saw a vessel sailing past and made a smoke in token of trade. She was already a little beyond the place, and as the wind was fair, the captain was in doubt whether to stop or not. However, half an hour later the ship would have gone beyond recall. When my companion saw her come to an anchor, he went on board from a canoe. One of the first questions he was asked was concerning me. When the captain understood I was so near, he came on shore to deliver his message. Had an invitation from home reached me when I was sick and starving at the plantains, I should have received it as life from the dead, but now, for the reasons already given, I heard it at first with indifference. The captain, unwilling to lose me, told a story altogether of his own framing. He gave me a very plausible account how he had missed a large packet of letters and papers which he should have brought with him, but this he said he was sure of, having had it from my father's own mouth, as well as from his employer, that a person lately dead had left me 400 a year, adding further that if I was any way embarrassed in my circumstances, he had express orders to redeem me, though it should cost 1/2 of his cargo. Every particular of this was false. I could hardly believe what he said about the estate, but as I had some expectation from an aged relative, I thought a part of it might be true. I was no long in suspense. Though my father's care and desire to see me had too little weight with me, and would have been insufficient to make me quit my retreat, the remembrance of my loved one, the hope of seeing her, and the possibility that accepting this offer might once put me in a way of gaining her hand, prevailed over all other considerations. The captain further promised, and in this he kept his word, that I should lodge in his cabin, dine at his table, and be his constant companion without his expecting any service from me. Thus I was suddenly freed from a captivity of about 15 months. I had neither a thought nor a desire of this change 1 hour before it took place. I embarked with him, and in a few hours lost sight of Kitam, God's ruling power and wisdom. So blind and stupid was I at that time, I made no reflection, I sought no direction in what had happened. Like a wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed, I was governed by present appearances and looked no further. But he who is eyes to the blind was leading me in a way that I knew not. Now I am in some measure enlightened. I can easily perceive that it is in these seemingly fortuitous circumstances that the ruling power and wisdom of God are most evidently displayed in human affairs. How many such casual events in the history of Joseph had each a necessary influence on his ensuing promotion? If he had not dreamed, or if he had not told his dream, if the Midianites had passed by a day sooner or a day later, if they had sold him to any person but Potiphar, if his mistress had been a better woman, if Pharaoh's officers had not displeased their lord, or if any or all these things had fallen out in any other manner or time than they did, all that followed would have been different. The promises and purposes of God concerning Israel, their bondage, deliverance, polity, and settlement must have failed. If history had not been as it was according to God's plan, then the promised Saviour, the desire of all nations, would not have appeared. Mankind had been still in their sins without hope, and the counsels of God's eternal love in favour of sinners defeated. Thus we may see a connection between Joseph's first dream and the death of our Lord Christ, with all its glorious consequences. So strong, though secret, is the concatenation between the greatest and the smallest events. What a comfortable thought is this to be a believer, to know that amid all the various interfering designs of men, the Lord has one constant design which he will not miss, namely, his own glory in the complete salvation of his people, and that he is wise and strong and faithful to make even those things which seem contrary to this design subservient to promote it. And next week, God willing, we do letter 7. Or we could do letter 7 now if we wanted to. His subject is dangers and deliverances. And letter 8 is the voyage homeward. So, God willing, we will be reading that next week. And sometime this week, I'm hoping it's going to be Tuesday, I'm going to be doing a video from the Timber Hill, well, Orford Place, Timber Hill area of Knowledge, where I had a meeting, shall we say, a meeting with someone who would eventually lead me to the Lord. But that's for 2 days' time, which will be Tuesday the 21st of October. And it will be the 30th anniversary of that event. So, until then, and if that video doesn't happen until next week, and may God bless you all. Amen.